Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: Stanford students are calling for help. They're accusing the Chinese regime of blanketing the school with a spy network and using it to harass the school's community and steal intellectual property.
We found out that all these universities getting money from China. So China tried to influence or steal, and they are the biggest theft and hacking for our computers and everything.
Lawmakers are calling on Duke University to cut ties with a Chinese institution and Wuhan University. More on the concerns about the Chinese regime's access to sensitive defense-related technology. President Trump striking a deal with the United Arab Emirates to build the largest artificial intelligence campus outside the U.S. More on the China concerns surrounding the deal. In Washington and Beijing, each stepping up their game in yet another race to secure rare earth supplies. An American mining company striking a deal in Saudi Arabia, while Beijing moves to tighten its grip on the entire supply chain. Stanford students are speaking out against threats posed by Washington's top adversary, Communist China. The school's own newspaper, the Stanford Review, is accusing the regime of inserting spies on campus, tasked with coercing students and stealing the school's intellectual property. The paper said it interviewed over a dozen individuals, ranging from professors, students, and faculty members to China experts specializing in espionage. After nearly a year of investigating, the paper has drawn a conclusion: the Chinese Communist Party is orchestrating what it described as a widespread intelligence gathering network at Stanford. And the strategies the CCP's campaign is using are unconventional. First, the crowdsourced approach. The report says Chinese spies would task civilians who are sympathetic to the regime with collecting intelligence, going beyond the reach of traditional spies. The report also found the CCP is collecting a broad range of information, including details on everything from the school's research projects and lab workflows to software and methodology. Stanford experts say that's to, quote, quietly extract the know-how behind American innovation. The Chinese embassy in Washington denied the allegations. Michelle Steele is a former congresswoman from California. In a recent interview with Fox News, she said,
Universities failed to find out that what's been stolen. So they have to train, they have to work with not just Department of Education, they have to report to the Department of Defense. We found out that all these universities getting money from China. So China tried to influence or steal, and they are the biggest theft and hacking for our computers and everything.
Here's a real incident that happened on Stanford's campus this summer between a Chinese man named Charles Chen and a Stanford student named Anna. Worth noting, both are pseudonyms. Anna is a student doing sensitive research on China. Charles Chen approached Anna on social media, posing as a Stanford student. Soon, Chen started encouraging Anna to visit Beijing and offered to cover her expenses. He also tried to pressure her to use WeChat, a chat app monitored by the Chinese regime. On top of that, Chen also obtained personal details about Anna that she never disclosed to him herself. That's when Anna turned to experts familiar with CCP espionage for help. They told Anna that Chen is very likely a Chinese spy and that this wasn't his first rodeo. For years, this CCP agent has approached multiple students at Stanford with similar tricks under different fake identities. His targets mainly female students studying China. In response to the investigation, Stanford authorities launched an investigation and reached out to federal law enforcement for help. NTD's David Lamb was on the ground asking people how they think the school should handle the situation.
Given that Stanford has a lot of foreign students from China, they probably need to vet those students properly before actually, I would say, recruiting those students to any sensitive projects or ongoing research that could be weaponized or extorted back to China.
I think making it known to the staff is definitely a good move so they can keep on the lookout for it. Making it known to the students that what might be going on.
The issue is not that simple. The paper said most interviewees would only speak under the condition of anonymity out of fear of retaliation from both the CCP and Stanford's own community. China has been ramping up its transnational suppression against its critics overseas. What's more, some point to the $64 million in funding Stanford received from the Chinese regime. Other witnesses say they're worried about being labeled racist if they were to call out suspicious Chinese individuals. The investigation came out a month after the House Select Committee on the CCP sent a letter to Stanford's president. It had inquired about the threats posed by China as related to the school's sensitive research. The school has not yet provided a concrete answer. Lawmakers are raising concerns about the Chinese Communist Party's ties to Duke University. They're concerned about the Chinese regime's access to sensitive defense-related technology. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more details.
Chairman of the Education Committee and Select Committee on the CCP are sounding the alarm on Duke University's China-based campus, Duke Kunshan University, DKU. DKU was established in 2018 as a joint institute between Duke and Wuhan University. Wuhan University is a direct extension of the Chinese military and intelligence apparatus. The lawmakers told Duke University President Vincent Price in a 7-page letter, Wuhan University administration and faculty members hold joint appointments at DKU, positioning them to directly influence research priorities, train students, and recruit talent in critical fields targeted by Beijing's military-civil fusion strategy, including defense-grade energy systems, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. They say Duke has already transferred sensitive technology through the partnership, citing a surveillance camera created by Duke University researchers in 2012. It cost $25 million in tax dollars. Today, this Duke-developed technology serves the CCP's vast surveillance apparatus, oppressing millions of people throughout China, including in Tiananmen Square, the chairman wrote. The report notes 4 other U.S. higher education facilities that have cut their joint ventures with the Chinese Communist Party. Earlier this month, lawmakers passed a bill to restrict DHS funding to universities that partner with the Chinese regime.
These talent recruitment programs are a win-win for China. China wins twice. First, U.S. taxpayers are funding their research, not China. And second, China then uses the research it would not have otherwise had to advance its own economic and military interests.
Additionally, a group of Democrats and Republicans have introduced a bill to prevent the Chinese Communist Party from accessing advanced U.S. semiconductor chips. The lawmakers said this is needed because the U.S.'s export controls on advanced chips isn't working due to smuggling, loopholes, and technological advancements. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A Duke University spokesperson confirmed the institute received the letter from Congressman Molinar and Wahlberg. The spokesperson told media, quote, Duke respects Congress' important oversight role and will work to further educate Congress about Duke's global education mission. President Trump cutting a deal with the UAE to build the largest artificial intelligence campus outside the U.S. The White House says the UAE has promised to protect the technology and keep it out of Beijing's hands. But Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer is urging more scrutiny.
Receiving a grand welcome in Abu Dhabi.
We've become a very hot country.
President Trump announces over $200 billion in commercial deals between the U.S. and UAE, bringing the total investments from the Gulf region to over $2 trillion, all announced during the president's 3-country visit this week.
And that's your biggest investment that you've ever made, and we really appreciate it, and we're going to treat you very, as you should be, magnificently.
The U.S. and UAE on Thursday also signed an AI agreement supporting the $1.4 trillion investment commitment the administration secured back in March. According to the White House, that includes the UAE investing in U.S. data centers and further aligning their national security regulations with the U.S., including, quote, strong protections to prevent the diversion of U.S. origin technology.
AI plus, it's a massive project.
The AI agreement comes as President Trump pushes for deals to sell advanced U.S. chips to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have been trying to become leading AI powers. But the region's deep ties to China had made the Biden administration cautious about the risk of China getting U.S. chips through the region to use for its own military. That resulted in U.S. restrictions on chip exports to the Middle East. Now, the Trump White House says it got countries like the UAE to promise that they'll prevent U.S. technologies from being diverted to China. But Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer warns that such promises need more scrutiny.
We have no clarity on how the Saudis and Emiratis will prevent the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, the Chinese manufacturing establishment from getting their hands on these chips. That's why we've had such strong restrictions against exporting these chips.
Meanwhile, despite the administration's push, it remains to be seen, though, if China hawks in Washington would actually greenlight AI chip shipments to the Gulf region, as that does require a licensing process involving several agencies. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
The U.S. and China are racing for dominance over rare earths. The elements are critical for making weapon systems, batteries, and other high-end tech. American rare earth company MP Materials signed an early deal with a mining company in Saudi Arabia Wednesday. The two aim to develop a rare earth industry in the Saudi kingdom, a strong U.S. ally. The news comes as China announced it would tighten control on the entire strategic material supply chain, from mining and processing to exports. On the China side, Chinese rare earth giant Shenghe announced it would acquire Australia-based company Peak Rare Earths. Back to the U.S., MP Materials operates the only rare earth mine in the U.S., but it's been relying on China to refine its ore. The company halted its rare earth shipments to China given the U.S.-China trade standoff. Zooming out, rare earths are needed to produce the majority of high-tech devices and weapons, including the F-35 fighter jet and the Tomahawk missile. China almost completely controls rare earths worldwide. It controls 70% of the global rare earth supply chain. It also makes over 90% of a type of rare earth magnet, one that helps guide missiles to their targets and tanks to navigate the battlefield. The problem appears to be on President Trump's to-do list. The MP Materials deal comes on the heels of his state visit to Saudi Arabia. In April, he gave Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick 180 days to suggest how the federal government can help develop a domestic rare earth supply chain. 2 weeks ago, Trump also ordered the U.S. to step up deep-sea mining. The ocean floor is home to a treasure trove of critical minerals, including rare earth elements. Trump noted that the U.S. faces unprecedented challenges in securing critical mineral supplies outside the control of foreign adversaries. He says stockpiling minerals for defense is vital for U.S. security. Coming up, the head of U.S. space operations at the U.S. Space Force is raising red flags about China and Russia and how they could be teaming up in space.
This is of great concern, and we have to think about how we can be in a position of strength to maintain deterrence so that they don't take those actions.
Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer, Chief of Space Operations at the U.S. Space Force. General B. Chan Saltzman warning that China and Russia pose serious threats to U.S. space defenses, especially China's so-called kill web. Here's General Saltzman describing how it works.
The PRC has developed what we've kind of, tongue-in-cheek called a kill web. And it's nothing more than a series of hundreds of satellites that are a sensor network that provide real-time updates targeting quality information of our force.
Saltzman says China's satellite network would allow them to monitor U.S. military activity and target them in real time. This comes as China and Russia cooperate on building an international lunar research station. Saltzman warned that China is ramping up its ability to launch spacecraft into orbit at an alarming rate. He also zeroed in on Russia, raising alarms about Moscow's potential efforts to place a nuclear weapon in orbit. Here's General Saltzman's response to that possibility.
The Russians are demonstrating reckless, aggressive behaviors with regards to how they intend to contest the space domain that will have far-reaching impacts beyond any localized military effect.
General Saltzman says the U.S. is in the planning phase when it comes to countering potential joint threats from China and Russia. He noted that to stay ahead in space, the U.S. must focus on protecting the critical systems that both everyday people and national security rely on. U.S. military leaders warned last year that China is positioning to invade Taiwan by 2027. If that happens, it could tip the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. A hearing Thursday at the House Select Committee on the CCP examines Beijing's military aggression on the self-ruled island. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
Let me close with this. We are not seeking war. We are trying to prevent one. And prevention only works if Xi believes that the cost of aggression is too high to bear.
On Capitol Hill Thursday, the center of the focus, China's military aggression against a self-ruled democracy that the CCP claims is a breakaway territory. U.S. intelligence and military officials warn that China is planning to invade Taiwan by 2027, an undertaking that could put America's security on the line and cost the world trillions of dollars in one single year.
When you look at the economic devastation that will occur worldwide if China takes over Taiwan, it will impact the everyday lives of Americans. It will further isolate the United States from influence across the world. It'll allow the malign influence of China to grow in a region that we cannot allow it to grow. And the first step is Taiwan. We've got to stand strong with them.
Despite having no legitimate control over the island, the Chinese Communist Party has stepped up war games around Taiwan in recent years. The regime mobilizes Navy, air, ground, and rocket forces, all to repel what Beijing calls Taiwan's independence.
Last year, Chinese warplanes flew into Taiwan's air defense zone more than 3,000 times. These red lines around the island are basically the path of Chinese warplanes as they traversed the air defense zone surrounding Taiwan.
The future fate of Taiwan could have national security implications for the United States. The island manufactures most of the world's semiconductors, a critical technology that Americans use in virtually everything, from computers and smartphones to military equipment like fighter jets.
What should everyday Americans know about China's military positioning against Taiwan?
Look, the Chinese entire apparatus from the People's Liberation Army down is built on both a one belt, one road that all goes back to Beijing. This is not about helping the world. It's about harming the United States. It's about enfranchising folks in Beijing and actually hurting the Chinese people themselves. We don't want to be in a situation 5 years from now. We've allowed the Chinese to have the upper hand, and they're the ones trying to dictate the terms to every American on Main Street versus us having the ability now to help drive a more amicable future.
Earlier this year, House lawmakers reintroduced the Bipartisan Taiwan Allies Act, a bill aimed at helping countries that could be vulnerable to the CCP's economic coercion due to their relations with Taiwan. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wang, NTD News.
There have been growing calls to counter China's rise in technological advancements, especially in realms like AI. But what exactly are the risks to Americans, and where is China getting the know-how? We sat down with Rex Lee, cybersecurity advisor at MySmartPrivacy. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany, for having me on the show.
We just saw Reuters recently had a piece out talking about solar panels or inverters, actually. So those are also found in electric vehicle charging stations, made by China. And then they had this extra component that could essentially shut everything down in the U.S., our grids, our cars, our solar panels. And then we've seen that in the past with smart TVs as well. So given all of that, Rex, switching gears a bit here, we saw the Senate had a hearing recently, actually earlier this month, called Winning the AI Race, Strengthening U.S. Capabilities in Computing and Innovation. What were some of the main highlights from that really stood out?
There's only 3 companies that control access to AI, control access to global commerce on the internet. And that's Google, Apple, and Microsoft. They're the 3 companies that control global access to trade and commerce on the internet through the monopolization of the operating systems. Everybody has to connect to the internet today using the Android OS, Apple iOS, and Microsoft Windows operating system. And this is highly relevant because AI developed in China that's integrated into their apps and platforms like TikTok, WeChat, or AI platforms themselves like DeepSeek, AI, and Alibaba Quinn. All of those have to be developed through apps that need IP from Google, Apple, and Microsoft. And that IP is given to them in the form of their developer kits. NVIDIA, likewise, to be able to develop AI, you need GPU chips from NVIDIA or companies that compete with them to be able to develop these AI applications. So these Chinese companies are given that IP by Google, Apple, and Microsoft, plus NVIDIA, to develop their AI integrated apps and platforms, which are then distributed by Google, Apple, and Microsoft. So what the hearing failed to address is that conflict of interest with Google, Apple, and Microsoft, and even IBM sharing their AI IP with Chinese companies and developers in China.
What would be the solution here? Because obviously these companies are also talking about national security risks. They're, testifying in front of the Senate. But in terms of most of the sciences, you often do see a lot of collaboration, research, sharing of know-how with other countries, including ones like China, that seem to then steal it and use it against us. What would the solution be here?
Yeah. Through China's military civil fusion program, companies that sell their products and services in China must share their IP, and then that is also shared with the Chinese military through their fusion program. And that's a huge threat. So what needs to be done is the government needs to say, look, let's stand back and look at this. Who are the three companies responsible for global access to internet trade and commerce? It's Google, Apple, and Microsoft, and they need to look at their relationships with these Chinese app developers and doing business in China. If you remember when Microsoft Windows 11 came out, well, ByteDance cut a multi-billion-dollar deal with Microsoft to make sure that the TikTok social media app was pre-installed on every new computer that has Windows 11. And if you upgraded your operating system online from Windows 10 to Windows 11, then TikTok was downloaded to your computer. Does that sound like we're competing with China? So it's a very complicated question that you answered, but in the short answer is the U.S. government needs to look at their own policy on this today and maybe reconsider the Supreme Court ruling and upholding that and stopping the distribution of these apps and platforms. And then also the government needs to work with Google, Apple, and Microsoft on a solution for this the conflict of interest.
Well, Rexley, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.